The shock of discovering that my daughter had gotten married through photos on social media was a moment that shattered something deep within me. It wasn't just surprise. It was a kind of emotional paralysis that made my mind refuse to process what my eyes were seeing. Scrolling through the pictures, I could see her radiant smile, the joy in her eyes, the carefully arranged decorations, and the people celebrating around her. But I wasn't there. My name wasn't in any of the mentions. My face wasn't in any of the frames. And my presence had been completely erased from one of the most significant moments of her life. The digital glow of the screen felt cold and distant, and the reality of being excluded was like an invisible punch that left me gasping in silence. In that moment, hundreds of memories flooded back. Her first steps, her first day of school, the nights I stayed awake when she was sick, the times she called me for advice or comfort. Every image was laced with warmth and the unspoken bond that parents believe will always remain intact. Yet now, as I stared at her wedding photos, it was as if all of that history had been rewritten to exclude me. There was no warning, no conversation, not even a hint that such a life-changing event was about to happen. The betrayal was not in the act of marriage itself, but in the decision to keep it hidden, to turn a page in her life without letting me even read the last paragraph of the previous one. The shock turned into a kind of numbness that made it difficult to think clearly. I replayed every recent interaction in my mind, searching for signs that something was wrong, some clue that could have prepared me for this revelation. I wondered if there had been misunderstandings I failed to address, or if she had felt judged, distant, or unloved in ways I had never realized. The more I thought about it, the more the confusion deepened. How could someone I had raised, nurtured, and protected decide that I didn't deserve to know? The questions came in waves, and none of them had answers that could soften the sting. The feeling of betrayal wasn't just personal, it challenged my identity as a parent. For years, I had believed that love, sacrifice, and guidance created an unbreakable foundation between parent and child. But now, I was confronted with the possibility that this foundation had cracked long before I noticed. Every wedding picture felt like a quiet declaration that I no longer had a place in her life, that my role had ended without ceremony or acknowledgement. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was existential, forcing me to confront how fragile relationships can be, even those built on years of care and devotion. As I stared at the photos again and again, trying to absorb what had happened, I felt like a stranger looking into a life that used to be part of my own. The betrayal lingered in the smallest details. The absence of a phone call, the silence in the days leading up to it, the way she smiled at others while I sat alone, learning about it all through a screen. The emotional turmoil that followed was relentless, a tangled mix of disbelief, sadness, and quiet rage that refused to settle. It began as a hollow ache in my chest, spreading slowly until it seemed to occupy every thought, every breath, every hour of the day. The sense of exclusion was not simply about missing an event. It was about being erased from a chapter of her life that should have naturally included me. The idea that my daughter could stand before someone, exchange vows, and begin a new life without wanting me, there was a wound that cut deeper than words could describe. It felt like being locked out of a house I had built with my own hands, watching from outside as the lights glowed warmly within, knowing I no longer belonged. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about love and family. The bond between a parent and child is supposed to withstand distance, disagreement, even silence. But this felt like something different. An intentional severing, a deliberate wall built without warning. Each time I tried to understand her reasons, my mind looped back to the same bewildering question: why? There was no logic that could make sense of it, no justification, that could balance the weight of being left out so completely. It was as if a lifetime of care and sacrifice had been quietly dismissed, reduced to a memory too inconvenient to include in her new life. Nights became longer and heavier. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories and imagined conversations. I wondered what she had been thinking when she made that decision. Did she hesitate, even for a moment, before choosing not to tell me? Did she feel guilt when she looked into the camera and smiled? Or had she convinced herself that my presence would only bring discomfort or conflict? These questions became a kind of haunting, filling the silence with thoughts that refused to quiet down. The emotional exhaustion was constant, and even ordinary things. A wedding song on the radio, the scent of flowers, a family gathering on television, could suddenly reopen the wound. There was also a deep sense of humiliation that came with finding out through others, through images and comments from strangers online. The private pain became public in an instant, and I could feel the invisible judgment of people who knew before I did. The sense of being an outsider to my own child's life was unbearable, and the emotions alternated between sorrow and anger, between wanting to understand and wanting to withdraw completely. Every attempt to find peace only led to another wave of grief, as if my mind refused to let me move forward until I could make sense of what had happened. I tried to recall the last real conversation we had, searching for signs of distance that I might have ignored. Maybe there were words left unsaid, or moments when she needed me to listen differently. Maybe the silence had been growing for years, unnoticed until it finally became irreversible. The more I thought about it, the more I felt trapped in a loop of regret and confusion, unable to decide whether I was mourning her choice or the version of our relationship that no longer existed. The decision to sell her house came from a place I could barely recognize within myself, a storm of hurt and pride that demanded an outlet. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rational. It was a reaction born out of betrayal and disbelief. Each time I passed by the house, it stood there like a monument to everything that had gone wrong between us. It was filled with her laughter once, her belongings, the echoes of her life before she shut me out completely. But after seeing those wedding photos, it felt tainted, like a reminder of my own irrelevance. Every wall, every room, every corner whispered that I had been left behind, and the pain of that realization became unbearable. Selling it felt like a way to reclaim control, to erase the physical evidence of the emotional wound she had inflicted. When I contacted the realtor, my voice was steady, almost detached, as though I were handling a business matter instead of dismantling a piece of my family's history. The papers were drawn up quickly, and I signed them without hesitation. There was a strange satisfaction in the act, not because it brought relief, but because it allowed me to do something, anything, in response to the helplessness I felt. Watching the house being emptied, the furniture removed, the room stripped bare, was both painful and oddly cathartic. It was as if I were purging the remnants of a relationship that no longer existed, convincing myself that by removing her space from my world, I could remove the ache that came with it. Friends who knew about the situation tried to reason with me. They said I was acting out of emotion, that one day I might regret it, that the house wasn't the problem. It was just a symbol. But to me, symbols matter. That house represented connection, trust, and the hope that no matter how far she drifted, there would always be a place for her to return. Now, it represented exclusion, silence, and rejection. Keeping it felt like keeping a wound open, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Selling it was my way of saying that I refused to be the one waiting anymore, that if she could move on without me, then I could move on without her. Still, beneath the surface of that decision, there was an undercurrent of pain I couldn't ignore. As the final paperwork was completed, I found myself lingering in the doorway one last time, staring at the empty space that once held her laughter. The quiet was heavy, almost suffocating, and for a fleeting moment, I questioned whether this was an act of closure or vengeance. My hands trembled slightly as I locked the door, realizing that, in trying to erase her presence, I was also erasing a part of myself. The memories didn't disappear, they clung stubbornly to the walls of my mind, refusing to be sold along with the property. The decision, though final on paper, left a void that no transaction could fill. A silence deeper than the one that had begun the moment I saw her wedding photos online. The reflection on the strained relationship between us began slowly, like piecing together fragments of a broken mirror. I started to see moments differently, to replay old memories with new awareness, questioning whether the distance had been growing long before I realized it. There had been small signs, shorter phone calls, postponed visits, a subtle change in her tone when we spoke about certain things. At the time, I brushed it off as her being busy or independent, but now, looking back, those moments seemed like early warnings I had ignored. The strain hadn't arrived suddenly. It had crept in quietly, disguised as maturity, independence, and space. Somewhere along the line, our bond had shifted from warmth to formality, from comfort to caution, and I had been too blind to notice. I began to examine my own role in it, the things I might have said or done without realizing their impact. Maybe I had been too controlling, too protective, too opinionated about her choices. Parents often believe their concern is love, but sometimes that concern can feel like a cage. I remembered arguments that started with simple advice and ended with her silence. I remembered moments when I thought I was guiding her, but perhaps she felt I was judging her instead. The distance between parent and child doesn't always come from one great betrayal. It grows from 1,000 small misunderstandings, moments where love and pride clash until both are bruised. As I replayed these memories, I could almost hear her voice, patient but restrained. As though she was holding back thoughts she no longer trusted me to hear. That realization hurt more than anything. The idea that my daughter might have learned to hide her feelings from me because she feared my reaction. What once was an open, honest connection had turned into something careful and guarded. It was painful to think that while I had been trying to hold our relationship together, I might have been the one pushing her away without knowing it. Family relationships are built on a fragile balance of love and understanding. When one side feels unheard, resentment begins to grow silently. I began to see how our conversations had become transactional, focused on updates rather than emotions. We were speaking, but not connecting. Each time we avoided the harder conversations, the ones that could have healed us, we unknowingly added another layer of silence. It became easier to talk about the weather, work, or errands than to talk about what was really happening between us. That silence became its own language, one we both learned to live with until it felt normal. Now, as I looked back, the signs of strain were everywhere. The missed calls that went unreturned, the holidays spent apart, the way she no longer asked for my opinion. Every small detail painted the picture of a relationship slowly unraveling. I had thought love was enough to bridge any distance, but love without communication becomes a shadow of itself. The realization that she had built a new life without me wasn't just a single act of rejection. It was the culmination of years of emotional drift that neither of us had the courage to confront. ChatGPT said, "The consequences of my impulsive emotional actions began to unfold slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, and then all at once. Selling her house had felt like an act of control, a way to assert my presence in a situation where I had been made invisible. But as time passed, the weight of that decision began to settle in. The silence that followed wasn't empowering. It was suffocating. I had thought that by removing something connected to her, I could erase the pain, yet all it did was deepen the divide between us. The space that once carried traces of her life was gone, and in its absence, there was nothing left but emptiness and regret. Every time I passed by what used to be her street, a dull ache would rise in my chest, a reminder that I had acted not with reason, but with wounded pride. People around me tried to offer comfort, but their words often felt hollow. Some said I had every right to be angry, that she had betrayed me first. Others hinted that I had gone too far, that my reaction only confirmed whatever distance she had already felt. I found myself caught between justification and guilt, unable to stand firmly in either. The truth was, my actions had consequences that extended beyond the sale of a house. They changed the shape of our relationship entirely, transforming hurt into hostility and silence into a kind of emotional exile that neither of us seemed willing to break. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that what I had done wasn't about property. It was about power. In that moment of heartbreak, I had wanted her to feel what I felt: loss, shock, displacement. But vengeance, even quiet and disguised as practicality, always leaves a residue. It lingers in the heart, turning sorrow into bitterness. When I looked back on the decision, I realized that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The sale was final, but the emotional cost kept growing. A debt that could never be repaid with apologies alone. There were moments afterward when I imagined her finding out. The expression on her face, when she learned that her house was no longer hers. I wondered if she cried, if she felt the same sense of betrayal that I had once felt looking at her wedding photos. The thought haunted me, not because it satisfied some need for revenge, but because it made me see how pain can echo, how easily it can be passed from one heart to another. I had become what I resented, a person who caused hurt through silence, through decisions made without inclusion or compassion. The consequences weren't only emotional. There were practical ripples too. People in our family began to take sides, whispers spread, and the fragile balance of peace within the family shattered. What once had been private heartbreak became a public wound, dissected and discussed by others. I started to feel isolated not just from her, but from everyone connected to her. The anger that had once given me strength began to dissolve, leaving behind exhaustion and an unbearable sense of loss. Each day that passed without a message or call from her reminded me that in trying to regain control, I had lost something far more precious, the chance to heal the very bond I had been trying to protect.